Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wordfence Live. Underneath your WordPress website is the Linux file system, and file and directory permissions are critical to your site's security. So today, we're going to make understanding the Linux file system easier than ever. Get ready to chown this Linux file permissions for the WordPress user when we get back in just a moment. Thanks everybody for joining us on this edition of Wordfence Live. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. In a few moments, I'm going to be joined by our threat analysts, Ram Gall and Chloe Chamberland, as well as our special guest director of marketing, the awesome Kathy Zant will be joining us today. Let us know where you're at. I'm streaming live from just south of the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to go over Linux file permissions. So whether you're brand new to WordPress and have a bunch of experience with this, or you have a bunch of experience with this, maybe this is just going to be a refresher for you, but understanding the Linux file permission is incredibly helpful. So whether you're troubleshooting errors or you're just looking to harden your site's security, the Linux file system is very, very important, and we're going to go over all the reasons today. A lot of people just might be skipping over this, or they're new, you're not familiar with the file system and the permissions. That's okay. We're going to go over the basic level today and help you get that understanding. Incorrect file and folder permissions can cause a lot of errors on your WordPress site during upload and affect other functionality for your users. So in this episode, we're going to show you how to easily fix file and folder permissions issues in WordPress. Your self-hosted WordPress site lives on a computer run by a WordPress hosting company, and this computer acts as a server and listens for requests from site visitors, and it provides the content that they're looking for. So file and folder permissions tell the server who can read, write, run, modify those files hosted on your account. So WordPress needs permissions to manage these files and create folders on the server. We're going to go over all of it today with Ram, Chloe, and Kathy. So stay tuned here. Remember to hit the like button below the video here, as well as subscribe and hit the bell if you want to be notified. You guessed it, we go live every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's just get started here by bringing in Ram, Chloe, and Kathy. Ram, how is it going over there?
It's hot again. We had a few months off, and now it's hot.
How about you, Chloe? What's up?
Well, it's hot here too. I'm back in Florida, so it's warm, and I'm not enjoying it, but I'm glad to be home for a little bit.
I was going to ask if you were happy to be home. It sounds like you're 50-50, though.
Yeah, 50-50.
Kathy, how about you? What's up?
Oh, clouds. Clouds are up. Yeah, it's warm, though, and things are starting to green up, and the storms of February are just a distant memory, so.
Well, our favorite part, my favorite part is giving away swag. So let's start there. You're going to be seeing a link in the chat with a form, and you can submit your answer to the following swag question, which is, what does 777 permissions mean on the Linux file system? We'll grab your email address there so we can contact you if you win. If you're one of the first 5 correct answers, you will win the swag today. Again, that is, what does 777 permissions mean on the Linux file system? We got a lot to cover today. So why don't we just jump right in? We're talking about the Linux file system and permissions. Ram, do you want to talk a little bit about the WordPress file structure so we can get familiar here?
Sure. So I think many of you are probably fairly familiar with WordPress and how WordPress packages its file and folder structure, but I'm trying to share my screen, see if it works. Hey, yes, I have a screen share app. Cool. Anyways, this is my website. You're probably all familiar with seeing these 3 folders. So WP admin, that's basically the folder that all the admin dashboard stuff in WordPress goes into. It does have some internal stuff that runs stuff. WP includes is basically more of the WordPress internals that actually makes WordPress work. And WP content, that's where you put all of your stuff, all your plugins, your themes, your uploads, anything that is going to be changed. One thing that's kind of important to know is that these two are required for WordPress to run, but they're also completely interchangeable and replaceable. You can delete those and replace them with a fresh copy, as Chloe showed in a recent video. And a lot of the time, that's a great way to fix problems on your WordPress site, is because they're all the same. They're not unique. And just sort of preview of what we're going to talk about over here, but you'll see there's these sort of permissions. Sometimes you'll see them expressed as numbers, sometimes you'll see them expressed as little RWXs, but that's basically just a listing of who's allowed to do what with which folders and which files. So that's pretty much what we're going to cover today. And I mean, first, I'm going to hand this over to Chloe, but we should probably get into what we mean by users on a Linux file systems, which is not the same thing as WordPress users. I mean, there's not going to be any subscribers logged directly into your Linux box. Anyone who's able to log into the hosting account at all is going to be at least the equivalent of a site administrator on WordPress.
Yeah. So essentially, Linux is going to come with one default user, and that's going to be the administrative root user, and it's usually just root, if I'm not mistaken. And so that is basically what handles all administrative things. Most of the files are going to be owned by root to begin with, and you probably don't want to change any of that, and you're probably never really going to see much of that when it comes to WordPress. Most of what you're going to see is going to be a user account. So when you have this WordPress site and you have your file system and everything and your hosting account, most hosting providers or all hosting providers are going to give you a user account. And so this could be anything like www-data, which I see often. It could be the username of your hosting username. So like, for example, mine is like Tyler Ann, because my domain is tylerandchloe.com. So you'll have a user account. And so that's where basically that's the owner of your site's files, basically. So www-data or your username is the owner of wp-content, wp-admin, wp-includes, your wp config file, and all those things. So when you're looking at file permissions, it's going to be the first set of numbers that you look at. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's users. So we have the administrative root user to begin with, and then you have user accounts that you can create. Most hosting providers create that for you once you get set up and everything. So that's automatically created. You don't really need to worry about that. And then there's also groups. And so basically you can create a group and assign several users to a group. Again, that's not something you really need to worry about too much, but just wanted to throw that out there so you knew what it was. Ram, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, and that is that you mentioned that, most the default user on any new server is going to be root. But if you ever are in a situation where that's what your hosting provider hands you, just a root account, don't set your website up to be owned by root, because that means that anyone who compromises your website owns the entire server. Make sure you create a new user underneath root to handle all of your web stuff.
Yeah, that's very important.
I saw Kathy really agreeing with you there, random.
Yeah, and so I have a question. So now what if I have my site, but I need to do some kind of server update. Say I have a droplet at DigitalOcean or something like that, and I don't have the root user, I have a root user, but I have my site assigned to another user, but I have to do server updates. Isn't there a group, or how does that work with the sudoers?
Well, yeah, that is something that there's provisions to handle, and that's basically that you can add any user to a group called sudoers. People who are allowed to do stuff as root. They have to enter their password in first. Mm-hmm. This can be kind of useful, but I mean, it also can pose a risk, because if the site owner account is in the sudoers file, then that means that anyone who takes over the site can still escalate to root.
Right.
And Dave Harrington asks, are we always talking about Linux? And the truth is other forms, other Unix-like operating systems are used to host WordPress sites. It's fairly rare. I mean, OS X is loosely based on OpenBSD, but like the file system the permissions system is basically identical to the Linux file system permissions. So anything here is going to apply to any Nix system. And that's another thing I was going to bring up. The permissions you're going to learn about today, if you own a Mac, that's how the permissions on your Mac work too. So that's what prevents, if you have multiple people logging in to your same computer, that's what prevents you from reading files on, the other person who shares your computer's account and vice versa, or, adding files to their account unless they give you permission. So these are overarching things that apply to, I'm honestly going to say most computers in the world are going to be using this style of permissions.
Should I ask you about Windows?
Windows uses completely different permissions. They're not better. They're not worse. They're a little bit less granular in some ways. When I say most computers, I'm counting stuff like embedded systems, like your router or your like smart coffee maker, because they're pretty much all running some kind of, loosely Nix-based system for the most part, and they're all going to use file systems that use these kind of permissions. So like you could probably like hook something up to your like car's engine computer and it would still probably use the same permission systems depending on the car.
Interesting. Okay. Well,
So for the permissions that you were showing there, Rim, in your screen share at the beginning, these are the Linux file permissions, and we should give an overview there for anybody who's just getting going. You're seeing those letters, you're not sure what those permissions mean. Sometimes you're going to see the numbers, sometimes you're going to see the letters. Can we talk a little bit about what those mean and how to, what you're looking for there for security?
I think it might be time to break out the whiteboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you basically everything in these permission systems basically breaks down into three sets of people. There's the owner of the file, that is to say the person who created the file or the person the file is assigned to. I'm going to do this with the other hand because it's not this way. It looks in order from left to right. So there's the owner of the file. There's the group the owner is part of. Which is basically a way if you want to collaborate on stuff originally was the idea, but it's also a great way so that you can have more than one person upload files to a website and have them all still be served. And then there's everyone else. So those are the three things that you'll see covered. So if you see like Chloe's working on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll get that. Owner group, other. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then there's read, write, and execute. So read, basically what it sounds like, means that you can look at what's inside a file. Write means you can make changes to that file, and that includes deleting that file. And execute is a little confusing for two reasons. Number one, you need that set on directories in order to open them up. And number two, you can turn off execute on a PHP file and it'll still run because the file's not executing. It's PHP that's executing and then reading that file. So that's where it gets a little confusing, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds with it.
That's a good distinction, though. That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Did I kind of cover everything, Chloe? I feel like.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail. And so for the executing thing, so like if you had a bash file, this is totally unrelated to WordPress, but if you had like a bash file, you'd want to put execute permissions on it so that you can run that file. But since we're talking about WordPress and PHP, it's not something you need to worry about too much, except for the fact that it opens folders for you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyways, where this gets kind of confusing is that, in the nature of Linux, we love to make things simple and more complicated at the same time. And we decided that each type of permission should get a number. Now, it's technically an octal, which is a base 8 number system, but we're not going to dive into that either. But basically, it means that you can like figure out what the permissions are by what the number is. So like if if the number has a 4 in it, like, you know, if the number is 4 or more, then that means there's a read permission set. If it's 6 or 2, then it has the blah. Okay, yeah, I'm not doing a good job of explaining that, but it's like a 4-2-1. I'll let Chloe do this.
Here's this. So at read you have 4 bits, at write you have 2 bits, and at execute you have 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Okay, so basically when you're assigning these file permissions, you're adding each of these together. So if you want to have someone read and write, it's going to be 6. If you want someone to read, write, and execute, it's going to be 7. If you want someone to read and execute, it's going to be 5. And so that's kind of how that works. And when you assign out that 777, you're essentially giving every single group or user group or whatever we want to call those, the ability to read, write, and execute all those files. So that's why we don't want to give that out. And that's basically what 777 means. Does that sound right?
Yeah, like you'll still occasionally see, like, you know, instructions for troubleshooting. It's like, just set the permissions to 777. And okay, so caveat, that's not the end of the world, because someone still needs to gain a foothold on your server, and that means compromising, you know, usually some application or service on that server. It's not just going to be you set your thing to 777 and suddenly Joe Schmo can go to your website and own your site. That's not how it works. But it does mean that if, you know, you're on like a shared hosting account, depending on how they have it set up, if you have your permissions set to 777, and Joe Schmo owns someone else's website on the same shared hosting account, they can then, you know, do whatever with your file, which is kind of troublesome. And I think it was a couple years ago we found an issue like this in one of the larger hosting providers, where attackers were able to access WP config files cross accounts because the permissions were not set correctly. And we saw all sorts of mystery compromises happening this way because of, you know, basically the WP config file permissions were set wrong, and an attacker would, you know, gain access to one site on a shared hosting account, and then they would search through all the other sites on the shared hosting account and were able to read the config files and get like database passwords. And once they had those, they could infect all those other sites and create new administrators and add like malicious redirects to those sites. So it is a concern. It's more of a concern if you're on shared hosting, but it is always a concern. It's mostly that last bit you want to be careful for, that final number. Like, realistically, like 770 is going to be safe in most permissions, but you don't necessarily even want to have 774 a lot of the time. It just depends on how you're set up.
I see some good articles Adam posted for changing file permissions. We had a question, Ram, from Matt asking if it's safe to set permissions so that auto updates work or so that they can run.
Yes, it is. It is safe to set permissions. Realistically, I think that for most people, setting the group permissions to read and write is fine, because most hosting accounts are going to be configured in a way that that's safe. You really do kind of want to hit a balance. You don't want to go too paranoid about it. We've also had cases where, you know, Chloe and I both used to clean sites, albeit in different places, but we'd see cases where, you know, the hosting provider would suspend a website and then they change the permissions on the infected files to 0 for every user so that it was impossible to clean the site, but they wouldn't unsuspend the site until it was cleaned. So they sort of locked everyone out and told us, hey, clean this site, but you're not allowed to actually clean the site. So getting too paranoid can cause problems in more than one way.
So for anybody who's just joining us, we've covered Linux users and talked a little bit about them, as well as the file permissions, file owners, group owners, and so forth. Should we get into Chmod here? Ram, Chloe, Kathy?
Chloe, Kathy, either you want to handle it? I'm going to work on Matt Strauss's fix all the permissions script thing. And
Good luck with that. Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I mean, if you're on a shared hosting, basically, if you don't own the server, you have to assume that the possibility of someone else on that server assume that that site could be compromised and, deal with your permissions accordingly. I had a situation once when, I was a developer before I worked at Wordfence. I had a site I was developing for a family person and did this upload script in PHP, and it wasn't working just right. So I just set the permissions to 777 and said, I'll fix that later, because I had other things to do. And that site got hacked. And so, yeah, I mean, when you do stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, I got to solve this problem immediately right now. But if you're not fully understanding, what your script is doing, how things are working, you have to assume if it's on a shared server, somebody malicious is in another site somewhere, something else has gotten owned. Never assume that that your server and that your host knows everything that's happening on that server at all times.
Very good
That's my
thing to
two-
keep in mind. Yes.
My 2 cents. Learn from my battle scars.
Charles asks if a VPS is a lot more secure than shared hosting, and the answer is yes. You are a lot more secure from other people's sites being compromised. With that said, if it's your VPS and you have multiple sites, it's still very easy for the compromise of one site to basically turn into a compromise of multiple sites. Or if you are, say, renting, shared space on someone else's VPS, it's the same problem as shared hosting, only probably worse. So, yeah.
Okay, so change mode, right? Chmod.
Chmod.
Change mode.
Chmod.
That's what it stands for. Wow, I had no idea.
never
I
knew
just
that.
always called it chmod. Witness our breathtaking ignorance. Anyways.
I call it
literally
Chmod.
looked it up.
So,
Well, yeah.
like, go
Go ahead. Oh, all right. So basically, it's just the command that you can use to change the permissions of a file. So it's really as simple as that. So basically, you could just type in the command chmod, and then you put the number at the end of it. So if you want to change it to 644, you put 644. And then you would specify like the file or the directory or whatever you wanted to change. So basically, that's what it is. I don't know if I can give you a more technical explanation. Ram, do you have anything more technical than that, or do you think that is good?
I think that's really good. It's just a really quick way to basically set, who can do what with which files.
Yeah.
We did get a question from Tom Morrill if whether or not there was a need to address SELinux permissions and or labeling. So this is just my opinion, man. But as a general rule, SELinux is designed for much more secure systems than your average web server. Generally speaking, if it's a public-facing website, then your use case is entirely different from what SELinux was designed for, and you will experience nothing but heartache and or having to turn off all of the protections that it offers in order to get things working. It's designed for, like, things dealing with confidential or, like, top-secret information. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Now we've talked. Chloe just talked a little bit about the chmod and what it is at a basic level. So why not use that for something else we discussed, which is 777? Why would that not be recommended for anybody who's just getting familiar with this here?
So
And that is for Chloe or Ram. Sorry.
So as we discussed previously, 777 gives you, the read, write, and execute permissions for all users, groups, and all others. So basically, just as an example, if you're giving the whole world the 7, you're basically giving them read, write, and execute. So basically, if you're using a shared hosting environment and something's improperly configured, and another hosting account can somehow access your hosting account as a different user. So let's say you have user ABC and you have user DEF. And so if ABC somehow gets compromised and something is insecurely configured in the hosting account, which we have seen before, and EFG has their file permission to their WP config file set to 777, ABC, that hacker that's in there, can potentially access that WP config file that's over here and write and read it. So then they can get the database credentials, or they can modify it to point to a different site. So that's one of the reasons why, and it's the core reason really why you don't want to use 777, just because if that another hosting account gets compromised, your hosting account can get compromised if the hosting account is insecurely configured. It's not always the case, but it's just something to keep in mind. So that's why we always recommend keeping those file systems secure and those permissions appropriate for further usage. Does that sound about right, Ram?
That does sound about right, yeah. And yes, I've been corrected. By Tom Earl. If you are actually an admin for DoD servers and web servers, then yes, SELinux is absolutely your use case. I guess I was more or less saying that probably most of our viewers for like your standard WordPress site are probably not going to be wanting to use SELinux. So, meant the global you.
We do have some demos that we're going to show. Chloe, I'm not sure if you're ready for that. We have that. We have our swag winners in, which we're going to get to here shortly. I believe. We also may have some horror stories I know that Kathy might talk about. We had mentioned, before, shared hosting, some bad permissions, how it can go wrong. Do we want to demo, Chloe, some of changing some permissions, get some people familiar with what they're going to see if this just isn't something they've done before?
Yeah, so just real quick, let me go over what file permissions we kind of recommend for WordPress. So it's going to be 644 for, let me write this down for you so you can see it in a readable way instead of me just throwing out numbers at you. Read and write, I believe. Let me verify on my cheat sheet.
We've got a couple questions in the meantime from Sebastian. How is your file secure if Webmaster's process user has to have write permission to the files for automatic update to happen?
So here's the thing. You're not assuming that every random person who visits your website can tell the web server to write stuff. In fact, if any web application is able to get the web server to write anything that the user can control, that's bad and can usually lead to something called remote code execution. So we try to avoid that at all costs. I mean, yes, if you are really super worried about security, you can set it so that even the web server can't write stuff, but then you're going to have a very hard time doing practical administration. In a lot of cases, you may not want to allow the web server to write to, say, the WordPress admin and WordPress include directories, and maybe restrict it to a separate mount for WP content, or maybe even a separate mount for uploads. But as a general rule, you don't want to lock. There is a trade-off between locking things down too much for absolute security and day-to-day usability. And we find that for most people, the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, where it's more secure to have automatic updates if you're a smaller site, and cover any, newly patched vulnerabilities than it would be to prevent any write access whatsoever, because, some of those vulnerabilities might be like database access vulnerabilities, and you absolutely cannot afford to completely lock down writes to your database as well, or else you don't have a dynamic site anymore.
Right.
So what do you got for us, Chloe?
Yeah, so I have my handy whiteboard. So basically what we want to do is we want to give all files for owner this way, read and write, which is going to be 6, and then we want to give group 4, which is going to be 4, and then we want to give other read, which is 4. And then for all folders, we want to add execute, I can't spell right now, and that will end up being read, write, and execute for owner all the way over here. So that's 7, and then group is going to be 4, and then other is 4. So
we did get a question of, instead of 644, why not 640 and 750? And that's a good question. And that's that if you don't necessarily trust the environment you're in, that's not necessarily a bad set of permissions to use, especially in as the sort of aforementioned case where You're on a shared host whose responsibility it absolutely is to prevent cross-site or cross-account file reads, and they don't always do it. And in that case, 640 and 750 is probably a better idea. So if you don't necessarily trust your shared hosting provider and it works with 640 and 750, then do it that way. Especially for sensitive files like WP config. But you know what? It's not going to hurt anyone if, your site's index.php file is readable by some other account. It's mostly only for like sensitive configuration files that you'd really want to worry about that.
Right.
Tom had asked in your example, Chloe, if owner is the server account.
It's the website's account. So essentially your server's probably going to have a root account, but this is going to be like your WordPress site's account, basically. So yeah, the owner of the files, which is the WordPress site user. Yeah, if that makes sense. Okay.
Could you hold your whiteboard again? Because we're seeing some comments of people who'd like to see that again.
So this is for folders. I should have crossed off files there. So this one is for folders.
And we're going to demo this in a bit too, so you'll see it again.
Yeah.
Repetition always helps when you're learning stuff, right?
Yeah. Especially when there's numbers. All right. So I guess we can lead into showing how to do this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and start with FTP. So let me get that set up over here real quick.
Right. There's not one way to do this. There's multiple ways. So we're going to go over multiple ways that you can actually look at your file system and address these file permissions. So
let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm sharing it now. All right, so here you have your hosting account. And if you don't know what FTP is, you can go to your FTP account area. And you probably already have an account there. It's probably the default account, but you can go ahead and create a new one if you want to change your permissions this way. And so you can add a login and choose what domain you want to have it for and everything. And so today I'm going to be using Filezilla. It's a free software. If you want to learn how to use FTP and play around with it, you can do that. If you have Windows, I believe you have to use PuTTY to use FTP, or is that SSH?
That's SSH.
Yeah.
Filezilla is cross-platform, and as long as you don't install any of the crapware they try to push on you these days when you install it, it's probably one of the easiest FTP clients.
Yeah. All right. And then so what you would do there is you would put your host, your username, and then your password, and then you would click connect, and then I'll go ahead and connect. And then I'm connected, and you can see on my right here is all of my hosting accounts sites. I have like a bajillion sites in here, which is something you should definitely not do. So make sure you only have one site in your hosting account, because this is really bad.
But you're trying to get hacked for demos, so like...
Yeah, but it never happens. Yeah. And so I'll go ahead and go into one of these. I'll go to Central for today. Oh, and then so once I click on that, you can see all the file structure for that domain. So we have the WP admin, the content, the includes, and everything. And the easiest way, and you can see I set the WP include to 777. See, I want to get hacked, right? And I have a backup file. So you can see all these permissions here, and the way I know how to do this, and Ram, you can stop me at any point if you know an easier way to do this, but you can just kind of click all these, command, and then click. I'm going to click all the folders, and I'm going to right click and click file permissions, and then you can actually see these here, which is really nice if you don't want to remember the numbers and stuff, but you want to know how to do this. So owner, you have the read, write, and execute, and then for group you have the read and execute, and then you have the read and execute. So mine are set to 755 currently instead of 744. So I'll go ahead and change those. What just happened to me? Let's see. I think it just shut down. So let me stop sharing my screen real quick. I'm going to get Filezilla back up and working. Decided to quit on us.
Yikes.
I can do some Filezilla demoing in the meanwhile if you want.
Yeah, that would be great.
I don't know if Go on.
I want to talk a little bit about, because we saw that WP config file with the .bak after that.
Oh.
And let's talk a little bit about why that's dangerous and why a hacker would love to find something like that.
Well, you know that that Facebook vulnerability that Chloe just posted about that last week.
Yes.
So a lot of people, when they realize that maybe their WordPress config file has been compromised, they'll maybe change their database passwords, but they don't
Yep.
always change those salts. And basically, keys. So you can use the salts and keys in a WP config file to generate a nonce for any user. And if you happen to have that and happen to be able to generate a nonce, turns out that this, I'll let Chloe explain the rest of it, actually, since it was her find. I'm so sorry. I just kind of segued in without.
You're just so excited by this particular.
Just thought it was really cool.
It is very, very cool. But but basically that .bak at the end of that file, because the .php is not there, what ends up happening is that if somebody, any random person on the internet goes to your website and you have a wp-config.php.bak file, it is no longer being parsed by PHP. It is no longer being protected by PHP. That file then becomes like a text document. So anyone on the internet can actually load that file up in a browser like it's a text document and see all of your salts, see your database name, that database password if it has not been changed, if you're not in the process of changing it. So of course they're going to find that and they're going to try. So if that is actually your database password, there are ways of getting at your WordPress database that are not, through the PHP engine that's running your WordPress site. They can try to connect to MySQL by a command line interface through SSH and all of that fun stuff. So you want to make sure that if you are ever doing anything with your WP config file and you need to make a copy of it, that you put something like old-wp-config.php. Keep the PHP there. Don't ever put anything at the end of the PHP. Otherwise, you're just opening up so that it is world browsable.
Yes, though, yeah.
In a word. And then you can get into the vulnerabilities with Chloe's find from last week.
Yeah. So,
Exactly. Sorry, you've got the demo up.
yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's see if Filezilla is going to work for us now. So I launched it back up, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck execute on all of these. So I'm going to have 644, and then you can also put the numeric value there if you don't want to click these. And then I actually want to recurse into my subdirectories, and I want to apply to directories only. We want this to be 7, not 6. So I'm just going to change it. Okay, Filezilla is not going to work. Ram, do you want to take over the Filezilla demo? Because it just keeps quitting on me.
We're just trying to recursively apply permissions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Give me a second. I'll get this shared, and hopefully it doesn't crash for me.
Okay.
One thing the one problem with doing it via FTP is it takes a while, right? Because it's
It
recursively
does.
dumping
Yeah.
each directory, and then it does, then you want to apply that recursively to each and every file, so it takes forever.
So
But
I'm just-
it's an easy way of doing it, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to show it on a single folder so
Okay.
that it doesn't take as long. So
Yeah. It's just something to keep in mind that if you are going to recursively do it using Filezilla, that it's going to
yeah.
go make an espresso.
Yep, apply to directories only. Now, there's one thing I kind of wanted to point out while we're in Filezilla. If you're wondering about group permissions, you'll notice that, the owner in this is sometimes www.data and sometimes rgal. And that's because I've been kind of lazy and I'm using SFTP and I'm logging in as rgal. So one reason you want to have group write permissions set, or in some cases, or at the very least group read permission set, is so that, I as rgal can upload stuff to that site and it'll still get, processed. I don't have to change the ownership of everything to www.data in order for it to work.
Is it wrong that I'm curious what that hello dolly.zip is?
You know what? I think that might have. Yeah, I use my personal site for all sorts of testing of stuff,
Sure.
just like Chloe does. And that is probably something malicious that looks like a legit plugin. So, yeah.
Now, one thing we've mentioned a few times is the WP config file, and we've seen it as we see Kathy's cat there.
Hi.
Is adorable.
It's been-
By default, what permissions are we going to see on the WP config file, and should those ideally be changed?
Chloe.
I'm sorry, I saw the comment that came in and I thought it was hilarious. So, what did you ask, Scott?
Oh gosh, that is good.
Yeah.
She has a very specialized and particular set of skills.
I was
Skills to
waiting
make
to
for a
see
nightmare
a cat comment there.
Yeah. Okay. What was the question?
WP config file. We sort of browsed over at the beginning in our initial look. I can't remember if it was you or Ram, but that's going to be one of the files you're going to want to pay the most attention to, right? As far as like Kathy said, you're not going to want random backups sitting around, especially for that file. But do we need any special permissions or special attentions to the permissions for that file specifically?
Yeah, so the WP config file is probably the most important file that we're actually really worried about. The WP admin, the WP includes all those core files. They're not really specific to your WordPress site unless you make any customizations, which you shouldn't really do there. But those are all going to be, standard files and stuff. You don't need to worry about those too much. The WP content directory, you do want to worry a little bit about write permissions and stuff there. And then the uploads and stuff, those are probably available on your site. So those are probably not too much of a worry. So it does boil down to the WP config file is probably the most critical one and the one that you should be worried about the most. And like Ram mentioned earlier, 640, is that correct, Ram? 640?
That should be a sane configuration unless you're using like a singular www data for like every if it's the same www data user and you're not like in a chroot jail, then you might want like 600, but 640 is probably safe for most people.
Yeah, so that will just kind of make it a little bit more or less lax, so that other hosting accounts can't somehow see it. So that really is the main file that we're really worried about, because again, it has your database credentials and it's got your salts and keys, so all that stuff in there you don't want other people to be able to read. And then you might have some custom hidden stuff in your WP content, so you'll also worry about there. You'll also worry about the stuff in there, but the file permissions we've given you are pretty good, starting point basic for most WordPress sites. And then you can just throw that 640 on the WP config file as well. And I think that's pretty good starting point, right, Ram?
Yeah, and like, as Kathy mentioned, if it ends with a PHP extension, then it can't be read from the web, but that doesn't mean that someone who's, connected via SSH or even SFTP to the server can't read it. Whereas if it's got a .back extension, that means that anyone can read it as long as Apache can read it, which you usually want Apache to be able to do because that's how it serves up your web content. You just don't want it with an extension that actually reveals what's inside. You only want it to be processed and only output what it's programmatically supposed to output, which is nothing in the case of WP config because it's just there for WordPress to retrieve configuration information from.
So we got a few minutes left here, Kathy. We covered a good bit of the basics and a little overview. We have a few things to show still, but what would you like to cover here with the time that we have left?
Well, we showed how to do this with FTP. Do we want to also show? We should probably show how to do this with a file manager, like a cPanel file manager, and then let's look at how to do it on the command line if you want to save time. Chloe, do
All right,
you have your
while-
cPanel?
I was going to
Yeah,
say,
I
while
will-
we get that ready, let's show our swag winners, which we have a graphic for. We got Sebastian, Richard, Michael, Eugene, Mark. Congratulations for submitting the correct answer there. That was what does 777 permissions mean on the Linux file system? You're given all three permission groups there the ability to read, write, and execute for those files when those are set to 777. Anything else to add there, Ram or Chloe, with regards to the swag question and the 777 permissions?
I think that covers it pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah.
As always, if you when you get your swag, if you want to send any pictures in, we will show them here on live. We always enjoy getting the pictures. Thanks, Brandon, last week for sending in the awesome picture of Billie, like usual. We appreciate it.
Oh, and we have a video of Billie too, but we'll have to show that next week. I don't think we have it queued
Oh.
up, but so tune in next week because we'll have a video of Billie Piper.
Oh, so cute. All right, so here I have the cPanel pulled up, and this is the file manager in my cPanel account. And this is probably my least recommended way to do this, just because I think it's a little bit more difficult. But what you can do is you can click your directories, and then you can click on permissions. And again, it'll give you this nice little thing where you can check the boxes instead. And I want to get rid of giving execute to group and world. And then I click change permissions. And the one thing I don't like about this is I don't think there's a way to do it recursively, which means you have to go into each folder individually and do that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there's any way to recursively do this. Do you know of any way, Ram?
Not off the top of my head, no. I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, so that's probably my least favorite way to do it because I don't know how to do it recursively. But there might be a way, so I would Google that. So now I'll just show you my favorite way real quick because it's the easiest way to do it. And so what you would do is you would SSH into your account. And so I've already SSH'd with my key. So this is SSH. I have my key. I have my IP and my port and everything. And so the first thing I want to do is, I guess it is not going to work because it timed out. So 1 second while I stop sharing my screen, and I'm just going to log in real quick.
Let's answer. Richard Stibbard has a question. If another user on a share hosting account with malicious intent has access to the file system, they can change them.
So in most cases, most shared hosting accounts do have things set up so that that's not possible. It's just that there have been cases where they have misconfigured something and it has been possible.
Yeah.
It's not a case of, this is not a sort of willy-nilly sort of all the shared hosts have this problem kind of issue. It's that we have seen shared hosts occasionally have this issue. And all it takes is one, accidental Friday deploy gone wrong to make the issue pop up again. So generally speaking, yes, this is not like something that's happening all the time, but, it's something where it's a low but non-zero risk. So it's not a bad idea if you are in a shared hosting environment to change, anything sensitive like your configuration information so that other people can't necessarily read or write it.
Tom had asked about recommendations for not putting database user ID password in the WP config file.
I've seen cases where, environment variables, you can use those. There's got to be other ways to do it. And sometimes you'll have like a config file and a folder outside of the web root that you'll grab info from as well. But in most cases, wp-config.php is a reasonably safe place to keep stuff as long as you treat it right and don't, make it so that people can download backups of it. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, good security hygiene and a properly set up server. There's no real problem. I've seen a number of setups where they've got even the WP content directory is stored someplace different. But if you've set up the server properly and you are not, setting permissions improperly, things like that, if you're just, adhering to good security practices, having your connection information for your database in that WP config file in your web root is not a problem.
Yeah, and realistically, all of this permission stuff that we're talking about, in most cases, it doesn't become a security risk until someone has already compromised a WordPress site, whether it's
Right.
yours or someone else's site on the same server. So this is like the next step of security.
Which can be dangerous. I mean, obviously, we've talked about this before. Security is a spectrum. The most secure web server is buried in concrete, 6 feet buried underground, right? It's
Yeah.
secure, but it's completely unusable. And then you have the most usable web server in the world that has, everybody can access it, and permissions are all set to 777 on
Yeah.
every single file.
And I mean, like, most people aren't running anonymous FTP servers anymore.
Sure.
If you are, then yes, this becomes a much bigger deal. But, most people
But-
aren't doing that.
You need to find for your particular website and your particular needs where on that spectrum from cement to open to everyone, where is the sweet spot for your particular needs? So every security decision you make is going to be unique for your individual site. It's not going to be a one size fits all. This is part of the reason why as a Wordfence user, you've noticed there are many settings in Wordfence, so many settings, sometimes overwhelming amounts of settings, but there's a reason for that, because Wordfence is not, one size fits all. We know that you have specific needs for your particular site, and you're going to want to tune your security for your site, and that's the same thing for what's happening beyond the plugin, what's happening on the server. You're going to have to make decisions about securing that based on your individual needs as well.
Yeah, and there is a question of, can Wordfence prevent WordPress files from being tampered with when the web server's process has write permission to WordPress files? And the answer is no, and that's largely because Wordfence is not intrusive enough to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
Right.
Given the number of ways that PHP has to open and write to files, Wordfence would need to be embedded at a much deeper level on your server in order to do that kind of preventative thing and catch it midstream. So it's not really practical. And generally speaking, you won't really find many other plugins that do anything even remotely like that, just because they can't, using just PHP without getting basically much deeper level access to the server, which might not be, something that you can do on your shared host. So.
All right, Chloe, did your server let you back in?
Yeah, and
Awesome.
I realized I made a mistake the whole time while we were talking, and you should be putting 755 on your folder. So I'm just going to write this down and show you, so that I was giving you wrong information the whole time, and so you can correct my mistake. So it should be, you're going to get my whiteboard again. So for folders, it should be 755. It should look like this: read, write, execute, read, execute, read, execute. So it's 755. That was my mistake. I apologize. So folders or files are 644, and folders are 755. So erase what I told you about folders before. I apologize. But what we're going to do is I've SSH'd over here on the screen. And so what the first thing I want to do is I want to list all my files and some information about them. So I use LSLA, and then I hit enter, and you can see that we have all the same information from the hosting panel, but now it's SSH'd into. On this left-hand side, you can see all that DR, WX, crazy stuff on the left. So that's just the reading, writing, and executing thing. And then they don't give you the numbers here because we're SSH'd in, but you can again see the user, and then you can see the group right here. And I'm going to go ahead and change into the directory that I want to be in. So I'll copy Central 4 because that's what I want to work in today. Hopefully you don't have this many sites, so you should probably be changing directories into the public HTML directory if you only have one site. And so what you do is you go CD, and then you'll go ahead and just paste that, and then you'll be in that directory. And then what I want to do is I want to list all my files again just to verify I'm in the right directory. Here you can see all that good WordPress stuff in there.
I see your WP config is set to 777.
Yeah, it's still. I'm bad. And so what we'll want to do is we'll want to run this command, and let's see. You don't have to change into this directory, but it's just kind of visual for you. And so I'll go ahead and paste this command in real quick. and we want to be careful with it because I don't want to hit enter too soon. And this is directly from WordPress documentation, so you can follow this to the T. But what we'll want to do is find, and then we need to grab the path to the directory that we want to change file permissions to. In just one moment, because my screen went black, and then we'll go over here. And if you're using cPanel, you can easily just grab this from right here, or you used to be able to. So it's not going to be that easy for me today. But you can see your full path easily by looking up here. So I have home dash Tyler and. So I'll start with that. And so dash home and, no, not that, and then I can go ahead and I can just paste that directory that we changed into again. So, or I'm going to be difficult today.
You can just use the dot too, if that's the directory you're in.
Can I do that? Okay.
Or you you might have been missing the R there in Tyler, unless I saw what your path was.
Okay. Yeah. So you said /dot RAM.
Or just the dot if you're in the directory you want to be in. Okay. And that'll just do everything underneath that directory.
I'm making it too hard. So find dot and then type directory exec chmod 755 and just hit enter. And that should go through and it should change everything. But since it was already set to that, it's not going to change anything. And then for the files, you'll want to do the same thing. I'll go ahead and copy that one. So paste that. And since we're in the directory, we can go ahead and just do dot. And this should change all my files to 644. So dot, enter. Might take a couple seconds.
Still way faster than doing it via Filezilla or any FTP client.
Yeah, and so I'll go ahead and LSLA it. We'll see if this worked. So right now you can see that my WP config file has this WR, XR, WXR, WX. And so if we go ahead and list it, we can now see that my WP config file only has read, write, read, and read. So that is probably the quickest and easiest way to do it if you can get into SSH. So that's definitely what I would recommend. Did I miss anything there, Ram?
That's definitely the fastest way to do it. I know that some people might find this intimidating and other people might find this like super easy, but at the very least you can usually copy and paste a command. And while I don't always recommend doing that without knowing what it does, this is one of the ones that should be safe as long as you know what it's doing, which now thanks to us you do know what it's doing.
And if you're on a Windows system, I just learned this by helping someone a couple of weeks ago. The copy paste for Linux commands it didn't work. Why are people still using Windows? Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to type this whole password out. It didn't work. And then I'm like, well, let's install Putty. That'll make it faster. We'll just that has to allow people to paste things in. And no. So
Okay, we just got a couple minutes left. We have a few videos to show, which you're going to want to see. We lied. We do have the Billie Piper video, but we also have another one. Anything right before we do this, Kathy, anything that you want to go over before we jump into these?
No, let's roll it.
Okay, so we're talking about employment. We are hiring here at Defiant. We got a senior researcher position open for website performance research, senior operations security engineer, senior PHP developer, a few of those positions. So why would you want to work at Defiant? Well, got a video. Chloe, you've held a number of positions in the company. Can you give us an idea of where you started here and sort of the different positions you've held?
Yeah, of course. So about, I think almost 4 years now. I think I'm coming up on 4 years in a month. I started here as a, sorry, the cat is like in my view. I started as a customer service associate. So I was handling like billing and pre-sales questions. And I started from like the very bottom. And then over the course of 4 years, I've slowly grown through the company. I then went to customer service engineer where I handled actual like customer service cases and things like that. And then I moved on to handling site cleanings. So as I learned more and more about security, I was kind of able to grow into different security roles and grow through the company. And then now today I'm a threat analyst, so I'm looking for vulnerabilities out there in WordPress plugins, themes, and stuff. So I've had quite a journey from where I started to where I am now. Literally when I started, I knew pretty much nothing about security, and honestly, barely anything about computers. I worked at Starbucks before this, so I've been given this amazing opportunity at this company to start from literally the bottom and make it to where I am today. So I love Wordfence.
And along the way, you've got quite a collection of certifications, right? How many do you have now?
Yeah, so I have 14 certifications now, all paid for by the company. So that's one of the great benefits about working here is that your certification costs are covered, the training materials you need to get those certifications covered, and you're allowed to do studying on work time. So one of the things that I like to try and do is spend about an hour a day on continuing education. And then like on top of that, you have literally the best coworkers you could ask for. Everyone is so knowledgeable. Everybody wants to help you learn and grow. One of the reasons I'm in this position I am now is because our lead developer, Matt Berry, helped teach me a lot of the stuff about vulnerabilities in WordPress and like how to find them and things. So you would literally be working with a team of literally just amazing people, and everybody wants to help you grow and learn. So
we are 100% remote.
Yes.
Yep. Very flexible schedules. We have a couple hours throughout the day for meetings, a few days a week that you got to try to shape the schedule around. But outside of that, you're able to set your schedule. We have, you mentioned certifications that we pay for and education, right, Chloe? But we also we travel. We go to we try to go to DEF CON every year when it's possible. We also get out to WordCamps. We cover phone and internet fees for employees and other wellness programs. And there's a lot, right, Chloe?
Oh yeah. So like one of the things is we have a wellness program. So you get $100 a month or $1,200 a year, and you can use that for cooking classes. You can use it to get a snowboard and buy a snowboard pass. Anything that will help contribute to your well-being, which I think is a really amazing benefit. We just implemented that this year, so looking forward to using that this year.
Lots and lots of cool stuff. So go head over to defiant.com and check out the employment page there. And we're also going to be announcing some new positions coming up. So if you're not subscribed to the mailing list, that's a good opportunity to get on there and keep an eye out if security is what interests you. All right, now I believe we have one other video here, which I was super excited to see last week after the stream. Let's cue it up.
Billie Piper got in the trash like a naughty dog. No toys for you 1 week.
I love it.
That is so
Very good.
awesome.
I
We'll
love
add a
the
link to
campaigns.
Brandon's.
The cat is up to no good again in the final shot. So maybe they're the ones who actually attacked Sally's cat blog.
Yeah.
The cats.
Yes, they were jealous.
Congrats again to Brandon. I saw your article last week. Really cool story there. And thanks a lot for the video. We're out of time here. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button below. You can subscribe, hit the bell. We go live each Tuesday. I believe we're coming up on a year in our next episode. So thanks everybody who's been coming and spending time with us and asking some excellent questions and learning with us. We really appreciate it. If you're not already, go over to the wordfence.com site, hit the footer, and subscribe to the mailing list, because you're going to hear from Ram and Chloe and the rest of the threat intel team a lot. We're finding stuff. We always have an eye out, and it's going to keep you ahead of the game there. Kathy, anything before we go? Chloe, Ram?
Just
thanks
for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Until next week, we appreciate it. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.